something is coming, and if you've been following Bridgerton as closely as the rest of us, you already know that when this show drops even the smallest piece of information, the entire internet loses its mind. Because that's what Bridgerton does. It doesn't just give you a season, it gives you an experience. And right now, everything we know about season 5 is pointing towards something that might genuinely be the most emotionally complex chapter this show has ever told. The writer's room is open, production is gearing up, and the whispers are getting louder. So if you think you're ready for what's coming, let's get into it. Because Bridgerton season 5 is shaping up to be something we were absolutely not prepared for. Before we talk about what's ahead, we need to talk about where we just came from. Because season 4 didn't just wrap up Benedict and Sophie's story cleanly and move on. It did something much more deliberate than that. It quietly, carefully, and very intentionally started laying the groundwork for everything that season 5 is going to build on. And if you were paying attention, really paying attention, you would have caught every single breadcrumb they dropped. The question is whether you knew what to do with them. Let's start with Benedict and Sophie, because their ending was everything. That wedding scene in the credits felt like the show finally exhaling after holding its breath for 2 full seasons. It was closure in the best possible way. Not rushed, not dramatic, just real and quiet and earned. And that's actually the thing about season 4 that stood out the most. It trusted its audience. It didn't over-explain the emotion. It just let it sit there, and it trusted that we'd feel it, which we did. But here's the thing about endings on Bridgerton. They're never just endings. Every time one sibling gets their happy moment, the camera is already quietly turning toward the next one. And in season 4, that turn happened in the most unexpected and genuinely exciting way possible. Because while Benedict and Sophie were finding their way to each other, and while Violet was navigating what freedom actually looks like after a lifetime of structure and expectation, the show was already introducing the pieces that season 5 is going to use. And those pieces are centered almost entirely around 2 people, Eloise Bridgerton and Francesca Bridgerton. 2 of the most emotionally complicated characters this show has ever written. 2 women whose stories have been simmering in the background for seasons now. And the fact that both of their arcs got significant screen time in season 4 was not an accident. This show does not do anything by accident. Let's talk about Eloise first, because that final moment she had in the end credits of season 4 was honestly one of the most quietly powerful things the show has done in a while. She said, "I love a wedding." And for anyone who has watched Eloise Bridgerton across every single season, you know exactly how massive that line was. This is a woman who has spent years being the loudest voice in any room against marriage, against the constraints that society puts on women, against the idea that a woman's entire purpose is to find a husband and settle down. She has argued it, lived it, and in some ways sacrificed relationships because of it. So hearing those words come out of her mouth, delivered with that particular look on her face, it wasn't just a fun little moment, it was a signal, a very clear, very intentional signal that Eloise's story is about to shift in a way we haven't seen before. And that shift is going to require someone who can actually meet her where she is. Someone who doesn't just tolerate her opinions, but genuinely engages with them. Someone who challenges her without trying to change her. Which is exactly why the conversation around Theo coming back is one that keeps gaining momentum. Because if you remember their dynamic from earlier in the series, it was electric in the most understated way. He wasn't charmed by her the way most people are charmed by a Brit. He was genuinely interested in her thoughts, in her mind, in the way she saw the world. And that is exactly the kind of connection that Eloise would actually allow herself to fall into. Not a grand, sweeping romance forced on her by circumstance, but something real and slow and chosen. If season 5 is Eloise's season, and everything is pointing toward that, then the emotional core of it is going to hit completely differently than anything this show has done before. Because watching someone who has spent years resisting love actually decide to walk toward it willingly is a completely different kind of story. And it's one that this show is more than capable of telling beautifully. But then there's Francesca. And honestly, Francesca's arc might be the one that carries the most emotional weight going into season 5. Not because it's louder than Eloise's, but because it's quieter. And in this show, quiet grief and quiet longing tend to hit the hardest. Her storyline in season 4 was heartbreaking in a way that felt very different from the heartbreak we usually get on Bridgerton. There was no villain. There was no misunderstanding to resolve. There was just loss. Real, heavy, life-altering loss. And the way the show handled that, with restraint and with genuine sensitivity, showed a level of maturity in the writing that was honestly impressive. Francesca isn't just grieving a husband. She's grieving a whole version of her life that she had just barely started to imagine. And that kind of grief doesn't disappear in a season. It lives in you. It changes you. And the introduction of Michaela, John's cousin, at the end of season 4 made it very clear that Francesca's story is far from over. In fact, it might be just beginning. The chemistry between Francesca and Michaela was immediately visible and immediately complicated, because it isn't just attraction, it's guilt, it's confusion, it's the terrifying realization that your heart is capable of feeling something you weren't expecting it to feel, for someone you weren't expecting to feel it for. Michaela clearly left because staying was too difficult, because being around Francesca while carrying those feelings and while also carrying her own grief over losing John was simply too much. But when she comes back, and she will come back, that reunion is going to be one of the most emotionally loaded scenes this show has ever filmed. And season 5 is going to have to navigate that storyline with real care. Because it isn't just a love story, it is a story about identity, grief, and what it means to allow yourself to be happy again after losing something that felt irreplaceable. That's the stage season for set. And now, season 5 has to walk out onto it. Here's the thing about Eloise Bridgerton that makes her different from every other lead this show has had so far. Every single Bridgerton sibling before her walked into their season with at least some part of them open to love. Even if they resisted it on the surface, even if they pushed back against it, there was always a softness underneath. A willingness, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the thing that was going to make their life feel complete. Daphne wanted love. Anthony wanted it even when he was convinced he didn't deserve it. Benedict wore his heart so openly it was almost painful to watch. Even Penelope, underneath all her walls and all her secrets, was desperately hoping Colin would see her. But Eloise has been different from the very beginning. And that difference is exactly what makes her season the one that has the potential to be the most emotionally rewarding chapter this entire show has ever told. Because Eloise didn't just resist love as a personality quirk, she resisted it as a conviction, as a philosophy, as something she had genuinely thought through and made a decision about. She watched what marriage did to women around her. She watched how society reduced brilliant, capable, intelligent women into decorative wives whose opinions stopped mattering the moment they said their vows. She watched her own mother, a woman she loves deeply, pour every single piece of herself into a marriage and into children. And while Violet Bridgerton is undeniably a wonderful woman, Eloise looked at that life and made a conscious choice that it was not going to be hers. That takes a particular kind of resolve. And it means that when Eloise's heart finally does crack open, it is not going to be because someone swept her off her feet in some grand romantic gesture. It is going to be because someone got through the armor in a way she didn't even see coming. And that is a completely different kind of love story. That is the kind that actually changes you. Now, the name that keeps coming up in every conversation about Eloise's potential season is Theo. And for good reason. Because their connection, brief as it was, had a texture to it that the show rarely gives us. It wasn't built on physical attraction first. It wasn't built on social obligation or family expectation. It was built on ideas, on conversation, on the very specific electricity that happens when two people realize that the other one is actually thinking, actually engaged, actually present in a way that most people around them aren't. Theo didn't look at Eloise and see he didn't look at her and see a catch or a challenge or a prize. He looked at her and saw someone whose mind genuinely interested him. And Eloise, who has spent her entire life feeling slightly out of place in the world she was born into, felt something shift when she was around him. She felt, maybe for the first time, genuinely understood. But here is where it gets complicated. And it needs to get complicated, because that is how Bridgerton works. The social gap between Eloise and Theo was never small. He is a printer's assistant with progressive politics and no title to his name. And in the world this show is set in, that gap is not just a minor inconvenience. It is the kind of thing that families go to war over, the kind of thing that society uses to destroy reputations and close doors permanently. Season 5 is going to have to sit inside that tension and really reckon with it. Because Eloise has always said that she doesn't care about society's rules. She has said it loudly and repeatedly and with complete conviction. But saying it when love isn't actually on the table is very different from saying it when it is. When the stakes are real and personal and sitting right in front of you, principles get tested in ways they never are in theory. And watching Eloise navigate that, watching her figure out whether she is actually willing to live the unconventional life she has always talked about rather than just talk about it, is going to be one of the most compelling character studies this show has ever attempted. And there is another layer to this that I think is going to catch a lot of people off guard. Because Eloise isn't just going to have to fight against society in season 5. She is going to have to fight against herself. And that internal battle is always the most interesting one to watch. Because somewhere underneath all of that certainty and all of that fire and all of those opinions, there is a young woman who is genuinely afraid. Afraid that love will cost her the version of herself she has worked so hard to become. Afraid that wanting something as ordinary as a partner somehow means that she was wrong about everything she believed. Afraid that the moment she admits she has feelings for someone, she loses some essential part of her identity. That fear is not irrational. It is deeply human. And it is going to make every single moment between her and whoever captures her heart feel loaded in a way that no previous romance quite has. The other thing that makes a potential season so fascinating is the role her family is going to play in it. Because the Bridgertons are not neutral bystanders when it comes to each other's love lives. They are loud and involved and deeply opinionated. And watching how each sibling reacts to Eloise, the one who is always the voice of resistance, actually falling for someone is going to add a whole extra dimension to the season that we haven't fully thought through yet. Anthony's reaction alone could power an entire subplot. Because Anthony Bridgerton, who fought his own conventional instincts to end up with Kate, is going to have a lot of feelings about his sister choosing a path that is even further outside the lines than his own was. And Penelope, who now knows what it means to be seen by the person you love, might actually be one of the people who understands Eloise's situation the most, even if their friendship has been through a great deal. But beyond all of the family dynamics and the social complications and the internal struggle, what season 5 really has the chance to give us with Eloise is something the show has been building towards since the very first episode. A love story that isn't about finding someone to complete you. A love story that is about finding someone who makes you more of yourself. Someone who doesn't ask you to shrink or soften or simplify. Someone who looks at every complicated, contradictory, brilliant piece of you and decides that all of it is exactly what they want. That is what Eloise deserves. That is what her audience has been waiting for. And if season 5 delivers it, it is not just going to be a great season of Bridgerton. It is going to be the season that people talk about for a very long time. There is a particular kind of anticipation that builds around a storyline when you already know it is going to hurt. Not in the way that frustrating drama hurts, where you are watching two people make avoidable mistakes and you just want to shake them, but in the way that real, honest, deeply human storytelling hurts. The kind where you understand exactly why every character is doing what they are doing. And it still devastates you, because understanding something doesn't make it any easier to watch. That is where Francesca and Michaela's story is right now. Sitting in that space between grief and possibility. Between guilt and longing. Between what was and what could be. And season 5 is going to have to walk directly into the center of that space and stay there. No shortcuts. No easy resolutions. Just two people trying to figure out what they are to each other in the aftermath of a loss that neither of them has fully processed yet. Let's go back to where this started. Because to understand where Francesca is going, you have to understand where she has been. Francesca Bridgerton has always been the quietest one. In a family that is defined by its noise, by its opinions, and its drama, and its very public emotional lives. Francesca has always existed slightly apart. Not because she doesn't feel things. If anything, she feels things more deeply than most of her siblings. But she processes differently. She holds things close. She is the kind of person whose silences carry more weight than other people's words. And that quality, that particular kind of quiet depth, is what made her relationship with John so beautiful and so heartbreaking at the same time. Because John understood her silences. He didn't try to fill them or fix them or interpret them into something more comfortable. He just sat inside them with her. And losing someone who knew exactly how to love you in the specific and particular way that you need to be loved, is not the kind of loss you recover from quickly. It is the kind that reshapes you. So when Michaela arrived, the timing was brutal, because Francesca was still in the middle of being reshaped, still in the middle of figuring out who she was without John, still carrying the specific guilt that comes with surviving someone you loved. And into that raw, unguarded space walked someone who was also grieving, also lost, also carrying the weight of John's absence in their own way. Michaela didn't arrive as a love interest. She arrived as a reminder of everything Francesca had lost. And then slowly, quietly, in the way that only the most dangerous feelings develop, she became something else entirely. Something Francesca wasn't ready for. Something that scared her, and something that, if we are being completely honest, scared Michaela just as much. Because here's the thing about Michaela that the show handled with real intelligence in season 4. She didn't pursue Francesca. She didn't make her feelings obvious or push them onto someone who was clearly still grieving. What she did was simply be present. She showed up. She was genuine. And in being all of those things, without any agenda, she accidentally became someone that Francesca started to need. Not in a dramatic way. Not in the way that Bridgerton usually shows us need. But in the quiet, everyday way where you start to notice when someone isn't in the room, where their absence creates a specific kind of emptiness that you don't know how to explain. And when Francesca started to feel that, when she started to notice what Michaela meant to her, the guilt that came with it must have been overwhelming. Because loving someone new after losing someone you built your entire world around doesn't just feel complicated, it can feel like a betrayal, even when it isn't. Even when the person you lost would never want you to feel that way. The heart doesn't always listen to logic, and Francesca's heart has always been the kind that feels everything slowly, and then all at once. That is the emotional landscape that season 5 is walking into with these two. And what makes it even more layered is the fact that this is not a straightforward love story in any sense of the word. Book fans already know that in the original novels, the character of Michael Sterling is a man. The show's decision to reimagine that character as Michaela, a woman, changes the entire texture of the story. Not just because it makes the relationship between her and Francesca a same-sex love story, but because of what that means for Francesca's internal journey specifically. Because it isn't just grief she is navigating, it isn't just survivor's guilt. It is also the realization that who she is and who she is capable of loving might be different from everything she always assumed about herself, and that kind of self-discovery happening in the middle of grief, happening inside a society that had very rigid ideas about who women were allowed to love, is one of the most emotionally complex storylines this show has ever attempted to tell. And the show is going to have to tell it with real care. Because the audience watching Francesca's story isn't just looking for romance. They are looking for truth. They want to see her grief honored and not rushed past. They want to see her confusion treated as real and valid and not resolved too quickly with a neat emotional bow. They want to see Michaela's own internal struggle given the space and the weight it deserves. Because she is not just a love interest arriving to fix Francesca. She is a full person carrying her own loss, her own identity, her own fears about what these feelings mean and what acting on them would cost her in a world that wasn't built to welcome them. The best version of this storyline doesn't give us two people falling in love despite everything. It gives us two people falling in love because of everything. Because of the grief they share. Because of the loss that connected them before anything else did.